Nā rangatira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Wow, what an expansive room of esteemed colleagues and guests. I need to put my glasses on. The eyes are the window to the brain, and I find it hard to speak to a room when it's very one-dimensional. So there's a series of slides and me talking at you, which is not necessarily my forte. I'm much better without the slides talking with you, but we'll work with what we've got this morning. Firstly, what a privilege and a very healthy dose of adrenaline to have what looks like circa 400 of you from my days working in banqueting many years ago. The opportunity to have circa 400 OD, HR, development, learning specialists, talking to them about your cultural journey is one I'm sure many of you would like to pass up if you had the opportunity, especially when you're in your second week in your new job. But nonetheless, it's a real privilege. So the part of the brief for me was, Neil said, what might need to shift in our mindset to make the leap or the step change to Agile and an Agile cultural journey? And it got me thinking about mindsets before someone starts speaking on a stage. And it got me thinking about the really helpful, unhelpful voices that are often in our heads when someone with a role from a big company gets up with some slides and starts talking at you. Some of you right now with the speech bubbles above your heads are like, well, this is not going to apply to us, we're much smaller. This is not really for me because we can't go Agile. And there will be a number of other speech bubbles. So I'll open by saying it's a super, super privilege to be able to simply share a story. And that's all I'm going to do today. There's no prescription in here, although there are some really good learnings that we've taken. So feel free to take from what I share the context that you need to help make sense of a journey that you may be thinking of in terms of going Agile or just adopting Agile mindsets or any kind of cultural transformation. I've not explicit content's not something you generally use in these environments. I've not explicitly woven in OCI, LSI, GSI, or any other human synergistics acronym I could throw at you right now, because a number of my other colleagues have told that story. But I am committed to coming back and telling how, I guess, those facets of defining culture and measuring culture have made such a huge impact in our journey over the last few years. And perhaps Neil will have me back again to talk about when we retest, maybe next year, what our journey has actually looked like. But I'll let you draw your own conclusions as we work through our journey around how this actually is about cultural change. 1,500 people globally answered a McKinsey survey recently, and they had to pick the top 3 challenges in any Agile transformation. And unsurprisingly, culture and ways of working took up the top pick by a very healthy margin. So I hope simply to give you some examples and ways that we've thought about using culture to drive an Agile journey. So let's kick into it. Any great storytelling always begins with context. So a little context for us, which is also a key part of our cultural change and journey. This is our plan on a page, and it's been a fixture in our culture for many, many years. Probably the first plan on a page was 2014 in this format, and then obviously the marketing department have done some work to pretty it up over the last few years. But there are a few key words in here that really resonate, and this is a really important part of our cultural change journey towards Agile. So pulling out a few things on that slide, we've put it in small print so some of you can't see it, of course, just to be secretive. Future, faster, New Zealand, win big. Not in a competitive sense, although I will pause and say that has been one of our biggest shifts that we've had to drive in our organisation, is removing large doses of internal competitiveness and turning them into large doses of external achievement focus. So in this context, it's about winning big in New Zealand and for New Zealand. And then top decile inclusive culture. When we first measured our culture really meaningfully, we used a tool, not human synergistics, we've seen the light, back in 2013, and there were not enough red ink cartridges available in the world to print our results. Now, red in OHI, for any of you are familiar with that tool, is not a good thing. And our number was 14, not 1 to 14, one pingo, but 14th percentile. It doesn't get any worse than the 14th percentile. And actually, I lie, there was a different colour, there was some pink. So a slight gradient turn with some pink in there. So we couldn't have got any worse. And interestingly, everybody wanted to know how we could cut that cultural measurement by region, by gender, by age, by where you sat in the organisation. We said, let's not bother, shall we? Because it's red, whichever way you cut it. So we have been on quite some journey since then. When we then did a lot of work using OHI and a lot of data reference points, we then took on our next survey using OCI and OEI, and when we measured there about 3 years later after the red ink gate, we were about average. So this top decile inclusive culture is our aspiration. In short, from a cultural journey point of view for us, the stickiness of our plan on a page is really, really important. We constantly come back to this. We constantly use it. Leaders always refer to it. In fact, if we're even doing any kind of reorganisation, which of course you don't do in an agile world, but even if we were, we always come back to our why here to get us through. And so a little bit about us. So FY19 was a great year. Justine said we've grown our business in the highly competitive mobile cloud service categories, held our broadband position, entered new markets, led on cost management, transformed our company culture. It was just a short year. It's very pleasing to achieve these outcomes in a year during which we've implemented and embedded massive organisational change with the move to agile ways of working. And we are pretty proud of our journey, but I guess these anchors of context around our size and scale are not meant to deter you from a shift that you may be thinking of taking on. In fact, when I looked at these numbers, I was reminded of 6 years ago fronting up to my job interview at Spark, then Telecom, thinking about what my unique value proposition in my studious HR partner way was going to be. And mine was, I feel that I am a I can do more with less kind of person. The only problem with that was I really needed to put my money where my mouth was. But at that time, Telecom, we were fat. And so that was something that we wanted back in 2013. It's not really any different today, but I think we're a little further on in our maturity of cultural change. And the way I'd articulate it now for myself and for the organisation is where constraint is, it can create difference and offer magic. So I think we're all bound by one thing here today. We're trying to think smaller, even at this scale, nimbler, faster, and we just happen to have been trying since 2013. So here's our journey. This is a chart that some of you may have seen if you've been into any of our customer visits. In fact, raise of hands, anyone who's seen this that is not part of Spark. I can see Dave Morrison. Hello. So this is the hairy-legged spider, and what a compelling story this is. I'll let you read the quote on there. I don't like to say it out loud too often. It doesn't necessarily lead to good feel-good moments. But what you can see here is obviously the line that is in decline was our reality. The hairy legs were our hope. Now, all of you are very smart people. Hope's generally not a good strategy in an environment, particularly in telco. So this began our journey of massive cultural change. And the first thing we did was a 3-year turnaround program, but in normal Spark style, or Telecom at the time, we decided we needed to go a little faster than everybody, which is exhausting and exhilarating all at the same time, depending who you're telling the story to. So we actually delivered circa $350 million worth of savings, which we reinvested into our business in places that could help us take the shift to digital services inside 18 months. McKinsey said if you could do that in 3 years, we were amazing. There's nothing like a bit of McKinsey motivation, as we all know, to prove them wrong. So I guess in our culture, there is an element where we have to be cost experts, and a constraint mindset is absolutely a prerequisite to be part of our culture. By that, I don't mean counting all the pennies and being really cheap. By that, I mean constraint can breed difference and magic. Unfortunately, with all of that heavy lifting, though, it didn't change the fact that telcos are under an increasing amount of pressure to change, as you can see here. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here explaining this. You can tell the story yourselves, but this is what really then piqued our initial interest in Agile. And so off we went around the world to talk to the gurus. And I've got to say, when the board and the leadership team went, it wasn't necessarily a compelling proposition to shift to Agile. In fact, the first 4 companies led them to believe they should get an early flight home. Fortunately, they then visited ING, and ING has become one of our kind of cultural landscape look, see, get some ideas from. And I think that's really important, that you don't just have to have the experts, but you do need to ask some people around what they've done to get where they got. So we spent a lot of time with ING, and these were the 4 themes that they really helped us to distill around, will we go agile or not? Be clear on the why. It is, as I said, exhausting and yet exhilarating. So get really, really clear on why you want to do it. How change able is your organisation? ING said, look, if you haven't done much, I wouldn't go there. We were like, think we'll be okay. Refer the previous slides I just put up. Burn the boats. So this has become, I guess, a bit of a piece of vernacular for us. You go all in or you don't. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, because I had some of our retail people in the room yesterday and they said, I think you should actually say that we're not kind of operating in squads or 2-week sprints while we decide how we're going to serve our customers in the moment in retail stores. And that is true. We're not. But all in means we're all in for agile mindset. We're all in for what an agile culture requires. And we're all in for figuring out what that means. But we don't have a I'm agile and I'm not. And there is no door to exit out of this. We never had one. In fact, the board said to us, what could go wrong? And we said, a few things. They said, what are they? We said, we don't know. We'll tell you when they happen. That was a short conversation. And finally, and I think Sean touched on it this morning, I know he did yesterday, is there's no point in trying to take the prescription, lift it and shift it inside your organisation, and again, hoping for the best. It just doesn't work that way. In fact, it's really great to get ideas from people, but most of the time in our organisation, certainly over the last 12 months, and certainly still now, most conversations start with a blank piece of paper. And it's about being comfortable with there's quite a lot of work. So I want to spend the next 15 minutes really taking you through the key cultural levers and drivers that we pulled. So like I said, there isn't a prescription, but we think these are actually really fundamental when we distill down all the things that we did. So like I said before, we got clear on why Agile for us. The faster to market piece was about how do we become more nimble? How do we, like Joe said on the video, push decision-making further down the organisation? And how do we decrease handoffs? There were a lot of very healthy silos and separate business units in our organisation, which I'm sure none of you will experience or have. It was definitely unique to us. Embedded customer focus. So in Agile, it allows us to stop talking about customer insights and using them and constantly pushing them, I guess, or pulling people towards them. Instead, in a squad formation, customer insights are embedded within a way of working and within the team. And finally, engaged and empowered people, and I'll talk about that a little more later. So in short, stability and rigidity was not going to work for us, and we needed to make sure that our performance muscle was maintained at the same time. So the second thing we did was focus a lot and still on selling the change story. Sell's probably the wrong word up there because, to be honest, most of it was incredibly frank, very adult to adult. There was no sugarcoating of messages. Some of them were half finished, half formed. 80% had to be good enough for some of the time and some of the ways, and we needed to be okay with the imperfection of our storytelling. But what wasn't true was it wasn't random. It was very methodical. You can see an example. Someone spent a lot of time thinking about all the ways and all the times in which we'll communicate with our people. And the top team-driven piece, what hadn't worked for us culturally in the past, which our first OCI showed us really clearly, was cascaders of the cascade. So it needed to be the top team constantly espousing and reconnecting. And obviously, the thing that is often the place where people start is, so what's the new structure? So yes, it is true, it is much flatter. And with that comes a whole series of new cultural challenges, which we'll talk about a bit later, but a very different network of teams to that of our prior business. Like I said, in the past, there were niceties extended to one another across the business unit walls, where there was, quite frankly, a large healthy or sometimes unhealthy dose of competition, flourishing, and thriving like, I think, acorns growing in manure from time to time. However, like I said, don't be thinking that this shows that we've got full heavy agile, which is a term we call, operating in all parts of our business. You'll see off to the right there, we also have centres of excellence. So it's about the way of working or the structure that makes sense for the organisation at any time. So what translated from that reorganisation? 3 layers. So essentially in some parts of our business we went from 9 layers to 3. It only becomes really alarming when you actually make the shift. 9 layers to 3. That was a lot of managers managing. Sounds like Dr. Seuss. In that, one of the hardest things for a lot of our people to accept, and one of the things that we needed to be bold and courageous around, was job titles. It's very strategic in here this morning. Job titles were very, very personally and deeply set for a number of our people, but we had over 1,700 of them. I reckon we had more than that, quite frankly, but we did have 1,700 and now we have 120. Little tip from me to you is when you're not looking, they come back in. So a really strong hold in our culture that we constantly need to remind ourselves that the senior manager, of the executives, of the vice presidents was of a world and a culture of days gone by. And you can see the amount of heavy lifting that operated there in terms of new employment agreements being issued to 5,000 of our people. So what I would say is that structure piece, sometimes the misconception about Agile is that it's a bit free love. There was nothing free love about this flip. There was a very, very stable backbone operating in the background to make this happen, and it is a fundamental driver of Agile being successful. In fact, a leader said the other day, I have never in my entire career, with so much collaboration on offer, had to prepare so intensely for anything before. So all of the rigour and the standards and the work is in Upfront. It doesn't just go away. Now, naturally, we also told our people in the imperfect communication that within 6 to 9 months we would be back to have a look at how we were and to retighten, because it's only natural that when you flip at scale like that, burning the boats, 2 feet in, that there are things that we didn't get quite right, and that was true. And so this reset highlighted where perhaps we had some more agile, heavy ways of working which weren't necessarily suited for the customer outcomes we were trying to drive. Now, obviously this is the most important part. So the tools that we needed to reset in HR. Now, I know it's hard for us all to believe, but between HR, legal, finance and comms, sometimes we do like to work with complexity. I know, it's very hard to believe. But we did hold the mirror up quite a lot and spent a bit of time looking at a lot of the internal mechanics that we had operating. And what we found was quite a lot of complexity. And you can see here with all of that disruption and all of the reasons why we were going Agile in the first place, that if we didn't radically think about some of those things that are on the slide and how we might do them differently, then this was going to be the stop to the outputs we were creating. They were obviously all a great idea at their time. So we did that, and this helped speed the place up. So we looked at things like how we needed to change voice of the employee, what we needed to do about leadership development, how our communication processes needed to change. With incentives, we took some out. The salespeople are all still alive. We're okay. We radically simplified some of the incentives and reduced the pool where that actually made sense. So a lot of it was about shared ways of measuring success, not 45 different KPIs that again an HR industry would be chasing around behind. And I guess what I'd say here is agile organisations are both stable and dynamic, but removing complexity and culture is absolutely paramount. So we issued these brand new employment agreements to everyone. Show of hands, anyone who's seen one of these employment agreements in the room? Oh, there's Mike. Hey, Mike. I think you helped write them, Mike, actually. So the big thing here was we changed the language to very simple, removed employment legalese, made it a real opportunity for people to say, you know what, yeah, I am in, and pointed out all of the things that might be limitations for them or the fact that they might not like it. We removed the job description piece. As much as we all loved writing 4 pages that no one ever read that was out of date before you issued it, we declined that opportunity moving forward and moved to about 4 to 5 bullet points that captured the essence of why the role even existed in an agile way of working from the outset. And I just wanted to read, there was one other clause, which is the one that a lot of people talk about, which is the when it's no longer working clause. So we did input in there a chance for people to say, you know what, when things just aren't going that well, it could be that we're both out of sync. It might be hard to see us getting that back, right through to some serious problems that have become irreconcilable. That's incompatibility in employment language. We recognise everyone's built differently. We know our Spark way of working won't be for all. Treating people with respect is really important to our culture and our way of working, and we know that most people want an honest and adult-to-adult conversations, and first and foremost in these kinds of circumstances, and we therefore want the ability to have an open, straight-up conversation with you about options, blah, blah, blah. So that is taken as a direct excerpt. So that is about our way of suggesting to people, look, culture is about wanting to belong. It's not about being held to ransom, and we can help get through that irreconcilable without talking to you in big employment language. The next bit was a lot of fun, and had we known then, what we know now then, we probably wouldn't have done it. No, I'm lying, we would have had to have done it. So we had, like probably many of you, a really healthy banding system for remuneration, lots of overlaps, dimensions were about number of direct reports you had, scope and span of role. A lot of work went into creating that pay range remuneration model, but it was never going to work for Agile, particularly with the flatter model. So we moved to creating what we called the contribution model and creating pay points around a series of staircases. We've built about 101 of these contribution models. If we'd stopped at 10, Chris, and done a retro, we might not have gone forward. But nonetheless, we built 100, and here's what a contribution model looks like that then translates steps to pay points in the market. Craft is unique to the area of your craft, so that could be DevOps, that could be marketing, that could be HR, but everybody has the common people and mindsets and customer and business descriptors, and these are all about demonstrations. So those of you who remember the 70s, I mean, I wasn't alive, obviously, but there was the skill acquisition model, or the competency model, whereby if you could say, yes, I'm skilled in that, you might move up a pay point. This is the opposite of that. In fact, it was my fear when this got introduced by McKinsey that that's where we're going. This is about acquisition of the skill and demonstration of mastery over a period of time. And two other prerequisites. There needs to be a role available at that new step, and there needs to be funding available for the organisation to make a call about having a role available at that step. And had we had our time again, one of the learnings is we probably would have said that, the last two pieces, about 19 more times than we did. Here's what one looks like in size 2 font. Look, they're not secret. If anyone wants to read all 100 of them, come see me. Next bit was total clarity around what our agenda with learning and development would look like. This is just a snapshot. To be quite frank, in the agile heavy or the new way of working, if we had our time again, we probably would have started about 3 months earlier. We found this hard to get up in amongst all of that flip, and sometimes you've just got to take the imperfection and work with it and know what you can do at any one time. But we certainly, I'll talk a little bit later about how we've moved on with the learning and development agenda. Agile coach capabilities, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm not the expert, but Chris Tui is in the room, and he is the guru. But the main point here is, when we looked around, we decided we needed to build our own. These were so fundamental to the change in culture and the change in way of working and the pace at what we wanted to operate that we grew our own. And that was really hard work, but that has been amazing to watch the dividends pay. And sometimes we now are a shopping ground, so they're not that amazing, so stop looking. Transparency and measurement is the next bit. We carried on with voice of the employee. It was important to us that we saw how we were going. From the flip day to the end of the financial year, we grew by 9 basis points in ENPS. Our people tell us that they are more highly engaged and empowered. However, we do have some inconsistency, and we do measure that really closely as part of our cultural work by making sure we take a snapshot of how people feel in their tribe and also how they feel about Spark. So getting that context so we can then hone in and help those tribe leads via the Agile coaches and the HR partners to really pinpoint what's not working or where the systemic cause of the issue is blocking empowerment. So it's been quite the journey. There's a few things. We like to always make sure there is a commercial anchor in our culture too. And I think what you'll see here is we didn't have the culture piece on the bottom of a slide from some previous sharing of the story, but like I said, from the 14th percentile in about 2013 to average in about 2016, and we are due for a retest, but what we have right now is our litmus test around employee net promoter score of plus 41, which we think through all that heavy lifting hasn't been a small feat, but I put it here because it has been the driver of most of the points above it, in my view. I'm going to basically gift you the slide. I'm not going to go through it, but it's a way that we constantly, once again, keep coming back to the key shifts from a cultural point of view that were how we were and are now what we want to be. And you would have heard me talk a lot about those things all the way through, and they're fundamental to Agile actually succeeding in any way. So if we had to do it again, I'm going to bring all these up. I'm not going to talk to all of them. There are 10 top learnings. The bit I would call out here is 2. This go Agile to be Agile. You kind of can't do it piecemeal. It is or it isn't. There are variants, Agile heavy, Agile light, communities of expertise, but there isn't a ish. So if you're going to do it, back yourself and talk to a lot of people who've made mistakes, taken some good learnings along the way. Do not miss the opportunity to reset. The number of organisations that we talk to that talk themselves out within the first hour of hearing about the job title change and the remuneration model change and all of that heavy lifting, do not talk yourself out of it before you've talked yourself into it. It is incredibly liberating once you've done it. And on this page, I would say the sounding board. This is always a great concept. This is the sounding board for adults. So this is not a sounding board where there's a room this size and everybody puts their opinion in on the word that's in paragraph 32, and I'm not quite sure if you've said it the right way. It's a chance for our people, and it was, to really sense check and say, yeah, I'm in with that before we actually distributed it. So we did this with the employment agreements, and interestingly, no one left that room until they'd actually signed. So they came in and they said, yeah, it's a good idea. And we said, okay, sign it. And they went, I'm not so sure about that anymore. So that's the way we use the sounding board, to say you can sit here and say you think it's a great idea, but if you really mean it and you're really compelled, then you're part of this change. So it was about really using our people in a way that was meaningful for them to create the urgency for the change. And now as we look ahead, what got us here won't get us there. So today we're about a 2 to a 2.268, depending on which engineer you're talking to on any given day. And moving from the ability to spell Agile to where we are today, so just halfway from an Agile maturity point of view, was a whole lot of push. Everything I just outlined to you there, unapologetically, lots of pushing. Getting to a 5, which is like the promised land of Agile maturity, which is the culture we're chasing, will take a lot more pull, a lot more aspiration, a lot more inspiration, a lot more people going, I want me some of that. And that is, I guess, the big shift or step change in the next stage of our cultural journey that we're driving. How will we do that? We know that standards will help drive that step change. We're pretty unapologetic about this in our culture. One, it's not about saying you must do, that's not the standard we're talking about. We're talking about driving out inconsistency or variability in things that really matter to us. So when it comes to being a great leader, do our people really understand what great leadership looks like, and how do we help them get there? This is just an example of where we've started. And again, these are all written with our people, by our people, a decision I regret greatly. This is version number 432. 433 will only be written by me. Feedback is a multiplier in the mature Agile culture. And by that I mean even more two-way dialogue than you thought was possible. Feedback in the moment. We still have, and I'm sure again you don't have any of it, but a bit of what I call covert feedback. You're in the room, it's going well, the meeting's really good, you ask the person what they think, they say that's fantastic, then they go and tell their boss that was rubbish. So feedback in the moment is absolutely essential for Agile as a culture to work really well, and it is always a precursor to any kind of development that we do. And here's an example of things we're experimenting with at the moment. All of our leaders working through a community of experiments to become more agile or more mature in their Agile leadership ways will get really sound feedback about how they feel and about how all their chapter members feel. VOE, we've been thinking about. So this is something that, and Mike will know this, and also Chris, not everything is perfect with the VOE or the Voice of the Employee tool or platform that we have now. And this is just our way of gifting to you some things that if we had more time, it's not about hindsight, but now we know what we know, we would think about How can we own it best? How can we be more transparent? How do we remove things like anonymity and just open up and step into the trust equation more? How do we consistently pass the red face test of the feedback loop? And bringing the future workforce to New Zealand, we're experimenting now with this concept of really going after communities of practice as a way of leaders learning from each other. We are setting ourselves really aggressive targets, possibly because if we had our time again, we wish that we'd done more a little earlier or had more capacity to. And again, I'm really happy to pay it forward by sharing some of the things that we are literally blank sheet of paper around what agile leadership can look like. And the second piece is around progression and pathways, and I think this is even more challenging. A flatter organisation, how do you make sure that people understand, belong to that culture, what progression looks like, and how do you give them those opportunities? Whether we like it or not, a number of our people from lots of different generations are still looking for linear progression, and it's our job to be able to paint a different kind of picture. And at the same time, what does bench look like in an agile world? What are the things that we haven't thought enough about that we need to? And those core capabilities today, of which I've pulled out some that are surfacing right now through our talent review, and not forgetting the fact that we want to bring the future workforce faster to New Zealand's future. So what is it that we need to do in terms of skill shift as well? So we do believe that L&D, neatly woven, is a kicker. It will give us the additional productivity lift that all agile organisations are chasing. And these are some of the things. The last one's really important from a cultural point of view. You would have seen I'm wearing my blue heart. Don't leave home without it. Blue heart is our way of saying what inclusive, belonging culture means for us. And everybody who wears one has a commitment or a pledge. And it's almost like, unspoken, but you know what it is that you won't walk past and what it is that you'll have the courage and the boldness to call about creating a different culture and a different way of being. I just want to leave you with something that's a little off-piste, but it comes back to the whole, again, McKinsey saying the role of HR and it is critical in the Agile roadmap. So if you're in HR or whatever you want to call it, people and culture, let's not play with words, and you're not at the table, and you're not right in there, then something's not going to go so well, or things will diverge before your eyes. So it reminded me of back in 2010, an HR director I worked for at the time in a multi-global organisation, Dave, told me that HR was about being the quiet voice behind the great leader, making them even greater and bolder. And at the time I thought, oh, that's okay, because I'm not really a natural extrovert. I'm okay with that. But I just feel in the last few years that we've been talking a lot about HR partnering, but nothing's really fundamentally changed. There's still the same sort of HR gold standard, still about being a change expert, still about being a partner, but what does that really mean? And I think actually it's a chance for Agile for us to really fundamentally redefine the role of HR. And so playing with words like people, culture, performance, talent, they just don't get me out of bed. I mean, we could. You don't have to call it HR, but it's probably not top of my priority list to rename. It was more about sentiment for me, and I found something that actually, it sounds like I really love McKinsey, I don't, but they actually wrote this. I've just borrowed it unashamedly and changed it from what their purpose was to mine. And I think the HR partner of the future is one that belongs to a community and is more a gardener than a partner. It's a nurturer, it's someone who really thinks about great design, who is right there in the ever-growing environment of changing, and I don't think that we're behind. I think we're alongside, and sometimes I think we're out in front, particularly in Agile, reframing, calling things, role modelling feedback in the moment, being the actual cultural driver. So I thank you for your time today, and I welcome any questions that you have and anything that you want to borrow, look at, or talk about. It is our pleasure to be able to offer you that. Thank you.